My name is Walter Pasquarelli. Really excited to be here with you all. I'm the head of an AI policy consultancy firm. And I'm really delighted because I think this is really an all-star panel that we have here today. When I was announced who the speakers were, I kind of knew already who we were talking to. So this is really fantastic. And the way that we are going to approach this conversation is by, first of all, looking at the opportunities of artificial intelligence. We will then move on to looking at sort of the challenges that are out there. Of course, the issue of trust, which is something that has been pervasive across these questions. And we'll then end up with a question on the future of artificial intelligence in government. I'm joined here today by, here on my left, Thomas Pramoditam, who is the CEO of Presight, a G42 company. We then have Antonio de Palmas, who is the Vice President of Global Market Development and Worldwide Public Sector at Microsoft. Gianluca Misurata, who is the Founder and Vice President on Technology Diplomacy of Inspiring Futures, as well as Carlos Santiso, who is the Head of Division for Digital, Innovative and Open Government and Public Governance Director at the OECD. Thank you so much for joining me. So I'd like to start with a very quick question to each of you, just a 10-second answer question. Scale from 1 to 10, 1 being the lowest, 10 being the highest. How do you estimate the impact of AI in government services? Starting with you, Thomas.
I think the fact that we are all here, 11.
11.
Right, I think we're off the charts. Why? We talk about AI today as if it's the latest topic, but AI has been around since the early 1970s, right? And if you fast forward, the governments have been using AI, foundation AI, and big data algorithms for a long time. UAE started our 2017 Ministry of AI, demonstrates in the earlier panel how much of the AI algorithms have gone in to power our cities. So now with the power of LLMs and generative AI, it's off the chart. So it's 11 for me.
Well, judging on the World Government Summit, what we have seen yesterday and heard yesterday and today is a full 10 plus. That said, I will give a 9 because 10 will be we're ready. We just need to switch on and we're ready to start. We are not. There are still challenges to be addressed. Important ones like trust, inclusiveness, security, skilling, big one. And the 9 is to remind us that we need to stay focused, intentional, to make sure we address the challenge the right way.
Luca.
Well, if I put my academic hat on, I would say it depends. So it could definitely be 11, as was said, but could also be minus 10 if we are not careful.
Finally, Carlos.
Yeah. No, but maybe just before I try to respond also, again, thanking the government of the UAE for the invitation extended to the OECD, to His Excellency Mohammed bin Talia also for his team and the fabulous panel and forum they have put together. But I think maybe rather than a number, I would say, to answer your question is that probably AI is going to affect governments more than we think, but less than we hope. More than we think because there's going to be a lot of mistakes and misuses. And we have to learn from them to mitigate those risks as well. But probably less than we hope because the fear of misuse will lead probably to misuse of AI that could be deployed. And so there's, finding this balance between mitigating the risk of misuses and making sure that you don't miss any use would be quite interesting as we go forward.
And I think, Carlos, this is actually a perfect segue into sort of the next question is, let's start the conversation by grounding the idea of the sort of potential of AI. And I really like the way you framed it. It's sort of like more than we think, but less than we hope is kind of like, I'll need to write that down. But sort of what distinct advantages from your point of view, having worked internationally, first in Latin America, now sort of at the OECD, what distinct advantages do you see, do you identify of AI bringing in terms of value to public services and governance compared to, for example, more traditional methods?
No, that's a very good question, and I think this forum is going to be all about these discussions because when we talk about AI, often we talk about AI applications in the economy and society. And I think in the last year or two, there's been a little bit of a wake-up call for governments to put their house in order in terms of governing AI within the public sector and governing with AI. And at the OECD, that's what we're trying to look at more precisely, not only governing AI, but governing with AI is going to change the way governments are operating, but also the ways governments are thinking. And the talk we had this morning was also quite enlightening in terms of this, speeding of intelligence. But I think governments have a lot of different roles in AI as enablers for responsible use of AI in the economy, but also as a financier, in particular investing in innovation. And the Prime Minister of Serbia was also quite dynamic around these issues around working with GovTech startups. But governments have a key role as funders. And there's a lot of talk about governments as regulators. But here, I think the panel and the discussion we have today is governments as users of AI. And I think at the OECD, we're working on these issues, and we see four main roles that governments are starting to, what is the expected impact that AI will have in the public sector. And the first one is really what a lot of discussion that we have been having in the previous panel, for example, is improving the efficiency of government operations and the machinery of government. It's really the internal dynamics and the internal working of government to make it more agile, to make it more seamless in the experience with citizens. The second effect that we see is also improving the effectiveness of public policies. For example, the targeting of social welfare benefits to people who actually need to have those benefits but don't necessarily claim them, for example. It's also about the responsiveness and reliability of public services. And especially I would underscore responsiveness in the sense of, this next move that we all talk about, not only seamless and digitalized public services, but services that are personalized and proactive and somehow, preempt the needs of citizens. And there's the fourth use that we see in a lot of governments about increasing transparency and accountability within government, in particular around, for example, government procurement operations, and this is very important, in particular around public spending in that sense. But at the same time, so there's all these opportunities of use, but I think there's also a lot of maybe missed use, because, for example, we just published recently, a couple of weeks ago, our index of digital government around in OECD countries and partner countries, and we looked in particular on how governments are deploying and developing artificial intelligence in operations. So in OECD countries, we look at some of the figures, and we see that a little bit over 65% of OECD countries are using AI to improve the internal operations and the efficiency of their processes, but only a little bit over 30% are using that to improve services to citizens or improving the content of public policies. So there's a way to go here as well. In terms of transparency, for example, we see that there's a lot of use of AI by integrity institutions to red flag anomalies or red flag procurement risk or the corruption risk in different areas of public spending. But we see at the same time that only 15% of OECD countries have systems in place to make sure that the algorithms that they use to assist public administrations are transparent themselves in terms of how they use and deploy algorithms in the public sector. So again, there's a way to go in terms of practicing what you preach and using AI for improving government. And one area, just to finish that I think we're quite excited, is also using AI in critical challenges. For example, around the green transition. And there's a lot of read across between the digital and green transition. But at the same time, we see that not a lot of governments are opening up critical data for in the area of that are critical for climate change and climate change mitigation, and therefore there's limits on how far you can use those applications to nurture AI systems and algorithms. But there's an area of development again where governments have a key role to play to improve the quality of public policies based on better data and based on better algorithms and AI applications.
And for that, I think one of the key elements is that we need, of course, the right kinds of technological innovation and sort of as the backbone, so that we have the policies that are supported by sort of a strong foundation. I think, Antonio, you'll be quite well positioned to answer this, particularly because I'm aware that Microsoft, as we all know, has been doing quite a lot of work together with OpenAI. And so the question that I'm wondering and that I have to you is, like, how do you see these new technologies really bring value to governments, but also to government workers?
I think I'd like to start from a data point here. And the data point is only 10% of government data are on the cloud right now, which means that 90% of government data are not in the cloud, in the public cloud, in the hyperscaler. The good news is that we see AI and Gen AI being an incredible forcing function for government to move data to the cloud. There is such a strong sense of urgency, driven commitment to do that, to the point that some reservations that we have seen in the past are being removed, because the sense of urgency is proved to be a greater force than those reservations. And especially when they understand that security and data protection and data control is absolutely possible in the public cloud. So this is important because I see AI being a big driver for digital transformation in government, and that's to me is probably overall the most impactful effect short term we're going to see, right? What we had not seen before, we're going to see now. Then, there are many others, of course, we see around the world many others, examples of great impact on citizens and employees. We recently did a great study with that show how 3 case studies, one in Portugal, one in Japan, one in Canada, how they deployment and adoption of Gen AI in public services, and in some cases services for the civil servants. In the case of the Tokyo municipality, they are creating great trust, great inclusiveness, and great result in terms of effective. But I like also to mention 2 cases. They are more regional here. One is our partnership with the Department of Health of Abu Dhabi, where we are deploying an AI-powered health applications for patients, and that gives patients, their records, their medical records, and appointment with the doctors, and is proving to be really, really helpful and impactful for the citizen. Another one is a partnership that the Ministry of Education of the UAE has with a local startup. They are developing an AI-powered student application with a tutor that can actually support the students after the class and make sure they have a customized and tailor-made support. And I mention this not just because they're regional, so I love really to show what this regions is doing with AI and for the citizen, which is very meaningful, of course, but also because I cannot think of a better impact. They're touching, these 2 applications touches our body and our mind. So health and education, what is more important for people? It's just, for me, it's mind-blowing. Life can change with this technology in a good way and really can improve life of people and, the education.
Fantastic. And I think if people trust you with their health and education, they'll probably trust you with much more as well. And I like the fact you highlight sort of the centrality of data as a foundation in order to be able to develop and use these tools in an effective way. And I think, Thomas, this is actually one that I think is quite interesting for you, which is data. We talk about foundation models, particularly large language models, sort of considered the frontier of AI innovation, with many countries investing quite heavily into their development. And so I know that at G42 you guys launched JACE, which is currently considered to be sort of the most advanced Arabic-speaking large language model. And from your perspective, what are sort of some of the standout transformations that you see enabled through JACE? What are sort of some applications that you're like, this is really what we're capable of?
We pull it back, Antonio has said 2 things. One, why do we develop our own LLM models? And in turn, if you look at the plenary session yesterday, we talked about every country needing to own their national intelligence. And at some point in time, you need to own a local LLM that speaks to your culture, to your language. So when we launched Jace, and Jace is available on Microsoft as one of the 3 models, but when we launched Jace, we launched it in September with 13 billion parameters. We updated it in November with 30 billion parameters, 130 billion Arabic tokens, 250 billion English tokens. But in itself, what does it do? So when we applied it, like what Antonio said, healthcare education is key. And if in the UAE, if I were to take an example, one impactful application that comes to top of mind is what we do with the judiciary system. Right? How could you use large language models to improve case reviews? Where massive of data it could be in multiple languages in different formats, shorten case review time, improve the way judges make their verdicts, shorten the time that a citizen have to wait. So when you talked about Carlos' point, being an enabler and a beneficiary of AI, as a government, we use large language models to improve our internal workings. So I manage my information better, I gather and collaborate with my fellow workers better in different languages, with more structure, with speed. And then I ask the question, what would my citizen gather? So I look for services which touches the mind, touches your health, touches your day-to-day. How would it change my life as a citizen if my government is using AI? So I think when we look at AI-powered applications, we're not looking at just the technology itself, but the end state. Do I reduce the number of days I wait for my prescription? Do I see the doctor in a shorter time and get an answer? Does my child learn better because there's the AI tutorage available? Do I get better digital services because the accuracy of the information across multiple sources is now better corroborated because there's the AI engine behind running? So I think these are the key things that I will see that will stand out in how we use large language models or AI applications.
Which I think is precisely the right kind of sort of mindset. We develop AI in order to make life easier for facilitating certain applications rather than developing AI because we want to develop
That's
AI,
correct.
even though it's like kind of like the buzzword right now, right? And Gianluca, I know that you have spent your entire career working within this field, specifically in government services. How do you feel has this sort of like change, sort of the mindset, the excitement, perhaps sort of the possibilities if we compare, years ago we used to talk about e-government, digital government, and now there's AI. Sort of, how do you feel sort of like the atmosphere changing?
Well, thanks, Walter. I'll call you Walter in the Italian way. And although you are basically telling me I'm getting old. And I'll be back on that. Let me also thanks, in fact, for the invitation, Mohammed and all the team for the fantastic organization of this forum and the entire summit. It's really a pleasure to be here and to see, in fact, the progresses. And it's, don't get me wrong, it's very important to self-celebrate our successes. And this is what's happening many places in the world, and also to benchmark, as Carlos was mentioning, the digital government, race has been over the years something that has pushed the sector. And indeed, in my over 25, 30 years that I've been in this field, I've seen this happening many times. And that's why I say we have to be careful, because the risk is that we are somehow in a kind of déjà vu. Because we have seen these already when we had the first wave of e-government, the digital government, also excitement. And now, of course, AI is changing the world again, and of course, always for the good. But indeed, we see that there are a lot of threats. And that's why the previous speakers before the keynote was right in saying that we may be at the crossroads in our lifetime, because indeed, what has changed with respect to the past is that there's been clearly an explosion in the computing infrastructure. So now we see a lot of possibilities that we didn't have even 5 or 10 years ago. The data, the availability of data is crazy. I mean, we have everybody is producing data by the time we walk and we talk. But again, the quality of this data has not yet reached the level that we need then to feed these models, and especially now we're talking about foundation models and generative AI. And also the algorithms are becoming more sophisticated. I wouldn't say intelligent. Actually, unfortunately, yet many of these algorithms are more complex, but not necessarily more intelligent. So actually, most of them are still imperfect by design. So we have to be careful on the, let's say, the power we give to this, because as it was mentioned before, especially when we talk about the public sector, we can be wrong. Of course, we have to use this technology. The potential is enormous to improve the life of citizens, the services. That's what I call the governance with artificial intelligence. And also, we have to regulate. That's the role of the public sector, to somehow decide what are the rules to follow. Not necessarily to block, because that would be impossible anyway, but definitely to make sure that the risks of this technology are taken into consideration. That's what I call the governance of artificial intelligence. But then this technology could actually also go further, and that is the governance by artificial intelligence, in the sense that we could be governed by these technologies unless we keep the human oversight, we have a critical thinking, and we make sure that the suggestions that come from these models are analyzed by humans in a way that serve humans in a human-centric way.
And I think that that's actually great, because we need to be careful how we develop these tools, because we want to do this in a way that's done well, both in terms of the development of AI itself, as well as the actual implementation. And Carlos, I know that you've worked and interacted with governments all over the world, so I think that provides us with a pretty nice horizon scanning of sort of what's been going on. And you must be uniquely well positioned to know all the sort of like the tops and the flops in terms of in terms of like AI implementation. Could you like mention to us maybe one standout success that you have seen in terms of AI implementation, and maybe one case where you feel it has been let's call it a great learning experience, perhaps?
Yeah, learning experience. No, I think, in artificial intelligence, like human intelligence, you probably learn more from your mistakes than your successes, right? I think that's the Chinese who were saying that a long time ago about our capacity to learn. But maybe just a few things. I mean, I think there's a lot of lessons to be learned from OECD countries, where there's been a lot of early adoption of AI in very sensitive and critical public services. And I think we have not to forget that a lot of the things that the public sector does is very close to people's lives in terms of the sensitivities. And we know all the debates around AI in law enforcement, biometric identification and law enforcement, for example. And Antonio can tell a lot of the work around justice systems and how these technologies are being deployed by the courts. Microsoft is doing a fabulous job with a lot of countries around those things. These are, and we see applications where we see a lot of problems that have emerged, for example, in immigration, and a lot of them in social welfare. Fraud detection, a lot of countries have used AI to detect fraud, but that's also led to mistakes. And that's my point about when you were saying about what's one of the biggest mistakes we've seen. But maybe I would say that's one of the sectors where we see a lot of lessons to be learned around the fraud in social welfare, for example, social protection. We've seen that in the Netherlands, we see that in Australia, we're seeing that right now in France, and a lot of issues there about if you get it wrong, then you really are impacting people's lives to the core, and you're impacting people, the most vulnerable people are impacted by those miscalculations of algorithms that were not trained by good data, for example. One of the things that we see also is, for all of these things is that, the algorithms are as good as the data you train them with and use them. And what we call the data poor, and a lot of populations in our societies are not generating the data that can be captured in those systems, and they are excluded. And we talked in a panel earlier around these biases that were, nurturing themselves. So I mean, that's one of the things that we see. But then we see that there's been a little bit of a shift by many governments around the world around getting that right, learning from the lessons, get our house in order, govern AI within the public sector better, with stronger standards, better regulations, also better supervision by the centers of governments on how these technologies are deployed by the different sectors, especially the critical ones. And we see, for example, Norway, that is developing a very interesting application called Frida to try to look at health benefits. Brazil has Alice in the Office of the Controller General to look at fraud detection, and there's a number of applications there. And maybe the ones I would like the most are probably those related to the opportunities that AI is also providing for helping citizens navigate bureaucracies in different ways. In Finland, for example, Aurora is an application that the Finnish government has put into place to try to benefit people. And I think also in Portugal, again, the case that Antonio was mentioning, that Microsoft is working with on Portugal, is also trying to, trying to simplify lives and make people's life experience with the bureaucracies easier. And there's a lot of, especially with the generative AI in particular, but I think with the AI and the analytics it brings, there's a lot of opportunities there. I think on the good side is how you make people's life easier, and accessing services and navigate bureaucracies. And this is in particular important this year because we are celebrating the 100 years of Kafka. So maybe that's, looking back at the castle and metamorphosis in different ways with AI.
Excellent, thank you. And Antonio, I'll be particularly interested in hearing also like a private sector perspective from your end, especially because you have this background where you work with Microsoft, but you work for the public sector as well. Do you see like, could you share sort of an instance where perhaps an AI project maybe didn't go as planned, or where there were some experiences that we made through where maybe things didn't go exactly as we envisioned?
Yes, but let me take maybe a broader view on that, because yes, I can. I mean, if I look around the world, there are projects typically about setting up chatbots for citizens that perhaps have a suboptimal impact in terms of delivering, accurate answer to the citizen or, meaningful. And, but I don't think that's really, what is important, I think, is to look broader and see why this project fails. And I think we are seeing a trend, a pattern of why they fail. And they tend to fail because the government agency that, adopt and launch those projects, they don't have a vision and an integrated strategy of what they want to do with AI. So they kind of try to do something, maybe, fast track a project, but when the project does not actually connect with the vision of the agency, with a number of other building blocks that you need to have in place to get it right, I mean, the chances that he fails are pretty high. And so that's also why what we're trying to do with some of our customers around the world is to work together to see what that strategy will look like. What are the building blocks, the foundation, that we have to think before we get the project out of the shop. And things like, the infrastructure, the platform, very important. Basically, you need to be clear, intentional, about what type of infrastructure we want to use. And then things like, the right use cases. Things like the regulation, the policy, the guardrails you want to put in place, and then cost control, procurement, how you procure really, the technology that you need to launch. These are fundamental building blocks that we need to discuss and have in place to have the strategy. And then the other thing is that, I said the vision. I mean, artificial intelligence is not for the IT people only. Artificial intelligence is politics. It's so pervasive, it's so integrated, it's so long-term, it's so impactful for people, for the economy, for the society, for a country, for geopolitics, for everything, that unless you have a vision that comes from the leadership, very clear, integrated with what is the future of that ministry, what is the future of that public sector agency, it's not gonna succeed. So that integration is key. Is one of the things that we're trying to do because we know it's needed, and as much as we can, we try to help our customer to do that. And so that's a recipe. I mean, absent that, the chances of failure, I think, they just get higher, and that's the first thing we need to try to focus on.
I think that's actually perfect, sort of looking at these various pillars that are necessary to be able to be successful, like the vision, the politics, the organizational element, and then there is, of course, one which is, as you said, understanding the use cases. And I think when we talk about understanding use cases, that brings up a question of understanding the technology. And Thomas, this question here, like looking at JACE right now, what are sort of some of the specific applications and use cases that we can expect? What are maybe its limitations? How do you see that?
I think there's two ways to answer that. So one way, from Antonio's point of view, it's the questions you ask. You start with the plan and your vision. You know, a city with no master plan, the AI can't help. A healthcare system with no aspirations to bring primary and secondary care closer to the citizens, the AI can't help. Right, so that's one way to look at it. And then now you look at the tech. So be it JACE, you know, it is the world's most advanced Arabic language model. You look at the other models that's available. Today's world, we are able to corroborate the models. So it's not about one model being more technologically advanced than the other or more accurate, but you need to use the right model to right-size the task. So that's one piece of it. I'll give an example, and the panel spoke very closely about healthcare. So one of our subsidiaries, M42, launched a MED42 clinical large language model. Right? It's probably one of the most advanced. It scored 72 percentile on the United States medical licensing requirement. It's designed to answer short and long questions when it comes to diagnostics. Then how do you apply it? So the Department of Health looks at it and say, okay, I could use this to be a clinical assistant to the doctor. Quick access to information, large volume of information. At the same time, I can make this accessible to citizens. Citizens with a single connectivity can access and ask a question that can get first responder quality diagnosis. Right? Is that about the model? Is it about the computation power? No, it's about a question that I want to bring the answer to my citizen a lot shorter. I want my doctor to spend more time on the patient than to be looking up diagnostics and say, well, let's look at my past notes, what do I have? So I think these are the key parts of it. But of course, the limitation is always there. Now you have a healthcare language, a clinical language model that does well. You know, many doctors will score at the 70 percentile, and you still go to them for your GP. So there's the risk of biasness, there's the risk of accuracy, and that continually needs to be refined. But like any doctor you go, you get second opinion, you get a human intervention, you make judgments. The AI itself is not a replacement, it's a enabler. It enhances the time I get access to information and a lot more information. It shapes what I need to know, but I need to make a judgment. And like many other decisions I make in my life, I will seek, you know, a second opinion, a third opinion. But at least I can do that now instead of waiting 3 days. I can do it in, you know, half an hour. Right? So knowing the limitations, but knowing how we applied it is exactly what the human intelligence would do in any kind of work that we engage in.
I think that's actually great, like sort of the cutting of time. I remember there was a Gen AI firm, which I'm not going to name now, but they said writing a marketing plan shouldn't take 3 weeks, it should take half an hour, which I think is a fantastic.
Now they do it in 3 minutes, and then you
or 3 minutes even, like, right? And I think we've kind of touched upon this topic now, and Gianluca, this one's for you, because I know you've worked, you still work in academia and research, and there's kind of like two elements that here I think are interesting. The one thing is a topic of sort of like, what's the best way of interacting with government? But there is also an element of education to me, because when I think about the role of academia, I think about the creation of inventions, but there is also a question of educating the next generation of AI leaders, particularly in terms of the responsible use of AI. How do you fulfill these two tasks within your sector?
Well, first of all, yeah, let me say that, I mean, also complementing the discussion so far, that because I spent half of my career working for the European Commission, the Joint Research Center, and I mean, in the last part, we were exactly supporting the policymakers in Brussels and in the member states exactly to, you know, prepare for this new wave of artificial intelligence. And of course, we set up the AI Watch, the observatory of the EU for that, and I was leading the part on the public sector. And clearly, we saw already in 2018 and in the years after that things were, I mean, there was a lot of talk about this, somehow a bit of rhetoric, and also a lot of pilot projects. But how we go beyond this syndrome of the pilot projects, that then you celebrate the success, that you launch the project, but then you don't see the impact. You don't really assess what is the social and economic benefits. And this comes with time, of course. In one of the previous panels, there was this long-termism versus short-termism that is typical of the policymakers, the dilemmas. Now, of course, as soon as I left and definitely we have a lot of best practices, good practices, good example, we are learning from. But in reality, we are still, at least in Europe, using only the minimum of the capacity of this technology to really disrupt. And maybe we are not ready yet to transform our government unless we really reframe the processes, we reframe the governance systems, and we think in a different way. Also, the way we deliver the services. And that's why also from education side, we need to train, and especially the leaders, in a different way. That's what we did with AI for Gov. So when I left the Commission, I was asked to, we launched this project, it's a pilot project for the Digital Euro program. And there we put on the same room, both from the, let's say, the educators and the learners, people with very different backgrounds, different disciplines. Some have very good IT capacities, others have not. We have the best that I know, AI and data scientists from UPM, the Politecnico di Madrid, but also we brought the Department of Design of Politecnico Milano. Why design? Because we need to redesign really the services. We need to reframe, as I said before, the way we think of a certain policy or a certain service. Because technologies, of course, can improve the efficiency, can optimize the systems, but they can really change instead completely the way we deliver, or also have new services, create new services that could not be imaginable without this technology. So that's what we are trying to do. I'm also now working with UNESCO and the Council of Europe on this, because unfortunately, and I'm not saying this because I need to do marketing, actually, we are victims of our success on this program because we cannot accommodate all the requests, but there is the need to have a new way of training policymakers, civil servants, that is not yet available in most countries in the world yet.
That's really fascinating. And from a private sector perspective, Antonio, I'm aware that Microsoft has been doing quite a lot of work within the field of responsible AI. I saw that OpenAI as well has been very vocal about this. And you mentioned earlier a sentence that I thought was fascinating, which is sort of like, if people trust you with your health and with, then I think that's something that builds trust right away. And I'll be curious to know, can you provide some examples of where you felt that using AI in government services is something that improved public trust and perception of these tools?
Sure. Yeah, on responsible AI, you're right. Because Microsoft actually started this concept of responsible AI back in 2017, and 2 years after, 2019, it was created the Office of Responsible AI. So it was structured, an organization to be accountable for responsible AI, and that was, well before the surge of generative AI. And the concept of responsible AI for us is not just which will be already, very important and critical, a manifesto for compliance and ethical application of AI. It's more than that. It's guidelines that guide our product development. So engineering and Microsoft don't build things that are not totally aligned with the 6 principles of responsible AI. So it's a way to get it right at the very beginning of any technology development to make sure that what it gets out of the factory, it's already designed to be responsible for AI. Because if you don't do that, it will be very difficult then to adjust, to put a patch afterwards. So design for responsible AI is a very important concept that we're trying to embrace. And we're also talking with so many clients and customers in public sector because they want to know how we do that. And it is challenging, Walter. It is challenging because, I think we can highlight the principles. Sam Altman this morning in the plenary session talked about this regulatory sandbox, which is a great concept, but I hope we had the time to do the sandbox of regulatory, but we need to have something for now because we cannot leave this, important domain unregulated for too long. So we have been very strong in advocating for, regulation of AI. This is, again, as I said before, is not a technologies as we have seen before. This is more than that because it's more powerful, but also because we see that it's much more pervasive, and the velocity of adoption will be unprecedented with everybody, every man around and women around the world. So to respond to your question, however, I think, the case, I mentioned this study we did recently with the 3 case studies in Japan, Portugal, and Canada, and I think there is a lot of trust and inclusiveness there and success, and I think the reason is that, they were very well taught and aligned with and consistent with the vision and the perception that the public sector agency wanted to convey to the citizens about what is the public services. So they were able to instill that notion and that perception in the services they deliver with Gen AI, and that created trust. Because trust at the end of the day with the citizen, I think is a function of 2 things. They need to see that the service is meaningful, fast, and high standard, and hit their needs, their basic needs, so education, so health care. So that's very important. If the service does not hit their needs, I mean it's hard to get trust. At the same time, he has to do that in a fashion that is secure and safe for the data and the way they're being delivered. I don't want to be too repetitive, but I think, when you can have those elements in the service, in the Gen AI services you're building, I think is when you have a strategy behind that and the vision. Because again, missing that, absent that, it's difficult to build that trust with something that, the citizen doesn't recognize really, designed for their needs and is part of, what the governments want to do. So again, I think it's really, a function of that. And of course, being inclusive is very important of this.
Fantastic. And mindful, we have just under 2 minutes. Carlos, I want to look at sort of the future direction of particularly policy change. And there's a lot that governments need to do. We know that. We talk a lot about adoption. We talk a lot about sort of like building the right enablers and capabilities. But if we look into the future, could you provide us sort of like the top 3, top 4 policy changes that you think are necessary for governments to adopt AI in their services?
Yeah, maybe, and maybe also underscore, I think earlier we were talking about how 2024 is going to be important in a lot of these things. And what we see from the OECD as well is that, there's the time is ripe and there's an appetite to get it right also for the AI for the public sector. In the OECD, we did principles on AI in 2019, and also when the UNESCO developed their guidelines for ethical use of AI in 2021. When you look at these things, we were not sure, how applicable they were to the public sector in themselves. The aim and the intent was really around regulating the use of AI in the private sector and society. But I think this time around, in this year, at the OECD, we're going to look back at what governments have done with those guidelines in the last 4 or 5 years, try to see where they need to be adjusted, and also how they can be tailored to the public sector. And government use and having principles and that can also provide guidance for governments to go forward. And that's some of the work that we've been asked to do also from our members, to look at what would be a good framework to ensure safe but also a strategic and responsible use of AI by the public sector at large, not only government agencies. At the same time, also, there's a number of processes we think that they are quite important, that are putting a number of critical issues when you were saying the policy changes. One is really about social inclusion. And again, this idea that no one needs to be left behind, especially those, again, who are not necessarily generating all the data we are in this room, but the people that are at reach. We were yesterday talking about Brazil and people living in the Amazon, for example. And Brazil in the G20 is also putting that issue center on responsible AI needs to be inclusive. I think that's a very big challenge we face in other countries where you have a growing population that is older. That also poses a number of challenges. But the inclusive part, I think, is an important one. And the third process I would just mention, and just also is also the G7 presidency, where Italy has put the issue of a responsible use of AI by the public sector, for the public sector, within government as part of the G7 agenda. And that's a change. Before it was really more broadly about the responsible use of AI, but I think there's now a big shift, not a big shift, but a shift in focus on looking at inside our houses or in governments on how that is being used. So, but I will, the only one challenge I will put forward is really about use AI to make inclusive policies, basically.
Fantastic. Well, ladies and gentlemen, I'm afraid we're out of time, but I just wanted to express my gratitude as well to His Excellency Mohammed bin Taleb for making this conversation in this forum possible in the first place, and of course as well to our wonderful panelists who have been sharing their insights here with us. So ladies and gentlemen, thank you very much, and please thank our speakers.